Good evening. May I wish you all a very happy and prosperous New Year. Sir Patrick Moore was part of the lives of amateur astronomers and professionals for more than half a century, during which time he popularised astronomy through his hundreds of books and monthly show, The Sky at Night. Patrick is remembered as a pioneer TV astronomer who made the subject easy to understand to a worldwide audience, and as a result Sir Patrick Moore introduced a generation to study the science, which led many to become astronomers themselves. I am proud to present this tribute programme, Astronomy and Space, in memory of Sir Patrick Moore, which is true to his original format. I should also add that I love the BBC Sky at Night. I have never missed a show, and its new presenters Dr. Chris Lintott and Dr. Maddie Adrian-Pocock are magnificent in their own style, continuing to make the subject of astronomy so easy to understand. I would also like to say thank you to Pete Lawrence for his monthly Sky Guide and learning all of us how best to photograph objects in the night sky, which is a nice treat in our digital age. The Science Museum in London has acquired the astronomer's extensive personal archive, which he collected at Farthings, his home in Chelsea, West Sussex. The collection consists of several hundred items, which will be kept at the Science Museum's Library and Archives at Rawton, Wiltshire, where it will be catalogued before being made available to the public. The collection also includes 70 of Sir Patrick's observation books, featuring detailed drawings and records of the night skies, alongside manuscripts for novels and astronomy books. The Science Museum has also acquired a 12.5-inch reflecting telescope, nicknamed Oscar by Patrick Moore. He had used the telescope for mapping the moon. It originally belonged to Welshman Hugh Percy Wilkins. We will take a look at Patrick's garden and telescopes later in the programme. 1923 was a remarkable year. Patrick Alfred Moore was born at a house named Innamanica in Cannon Lane, Pinner, Middlesex, on the 4th of March 1923. Patrick's mother Gertrude was born on the 27th of June 1886 in Islington, London. She was educated at Ravensfield College at Hendon and trained in Italy as an opera singer under Veneziano Sabatini. His father Charles was a military man, born on the 14th of September 1885, the son of a Scottish father, William Roger Caldwell Moore. Despite being born in Pinner, now part of Greater London, Patrick's first 6 years were spent at his maternal grandmother's, Josephine's, holiday home in Glasfara Road, Bognor Regis in Sussex, and then from 1929 he lived at East Grinstead, also in Sussex. One rainy day in 1929, Patrick's mother introduced 6-year-old Patrick Moore to a small book entitled The Story of the Solar System by G.F. Chambers, published in 1900. This book inspired Patrick's imagination to learn more about astronomy. He was hooked, and the rest of his life was devoted to popularising the subject to his millions of fans. Here is a copy of the book. Patrick's first trace of luck came when he met William Sadler Franks, who was in charge of a small private observatory named Brockhurst, a short distance from Patrick Moore's home in East Grinstead. Franks was born in Newark on the 26th of April 1851. During the early part of his life, he was occupied in his father's business in Leicester. Then, a glance through a friend's telescope turned his thoughts towards astronomy, and it was not long before he had an instrument of his own, mounted in a small homemade observatory. After satisfying his curiosity by a little general stargazing, Frank soon settled down to systematic work, choosing the study of star colours as his line of research. Franks directed the star colours section of the Liverpool Astronomical Society and later that of the British Astronomical Association. He contributed many papers on the subject to the monthly notices, and in 1921 he undertook a revision of the colours of some 6,000 stars at the request of the late Father Hagen, who published them in a volume of Idella Specula Vaticana in 1923. Franks joined the late Dr. Isaac Roberts at Crowborough and was there engaged in photographing nebulae and star clusters with the 50 centimetres, that's 20-inch reflector, until the time of his employer's death in 1904. He left Crowborough in 1906 and went to live at Uxbridge, where he had several small engagements connected with private observatories. The Brockhurst Observatory at East Grinstead in Sussex cannot claim to have been a major institution. Its largest telescope was a Bush 60 centimetre, that's 24-inch reflector, but much of the work was carried out with a fine 15 centimetre, that's a 6-inch refractor by William Sadler Franks. Frederick J. Hanbury, senior partner in the famous firm Allen and Hanbury, set it up in the first decade of the 20th century. Hanbury was very wealthy and bought a lovely old house on the boundary between East Grinstead and the village of Ashurst Wood in West Sussex. He was a noted horticulturist and specialised in orchids. His orchid houses were world famous and were attended by a large staff. The observatory was set up in the grounds and was very attractive. There was one main building with a dome for the refractor, as well as a transit room and an observing room. The Cooke telescope was optically excellent, with a conventional falling waist drive. There was an accurate clock and a small library. As observer, Hanbury engaged William Sadler Franks, an enthusiastic astronomer, although he never went to a university. Franks moved into a small house near the observatory, which he named Starfield, and it still exists today. From 1910 until the time of his death, Franks was in charge of Mr. Frederick Hanbury's observatory at East Grinstead. Historian Dr. Jeremy Shears was fortunate to obtain some of Frank's observational notebooks, and after contacting myself for help from my own research into the life of Thomas Bush, published a paper in the BAA Journal. Jeremy says that judging by the accounts in Frank's notebooks, entertaining visitors was not a particularly tiring task. Typically, only one or two groups of visitors would descend upon him a month, and often several months went by without any. The organisation which attended most regularly was a group of troops of Guild Guides who were generally treated to 2 evenings at Brockhurst every August. At other times, local church groups and YMCA members attended. However, it was Hanbury's personal dinner guests that were really the ones that Franks needed to take care of. It was the visitors that Franks hosted on the evening of Monday, the 21st of August 1933, that were fortunate. A certain Mr. Moore and family. They must have been impressed with the views of Vega, the double star in Lyra, and the ring nebula M57. All of the main planets were on view that night. The 10-year-old Patrick returned to the observatory the following week and looked at a number of interesting objects through the telescope. From this time onwards, Patrick Moore often visited the Brockhurst Observatory with his parents' blessing and made observations of the moon and planets with its main telescope. Franks was a good tutor and taught Patrick many aspects of astronomy. In 1934, the president of the British Astronomical Association, Major Arthur Everard Levine, introduced Patrick Moore to be a member of the BAA. Levine was the director of the computing section between 1930 and 1934. Levine lived in West Street, Chelsea, which is the same street Sir Patrick Moore moved into and spent the rest of his life. In August 2014, David Scanlon, FRAS, solved the mystery and found the actual house Major Levine lived in at 90 West Street, which is shown here. As a new member of the BAA in 1934, 11-year-old Patrick Moore decided to invest in a telescope of his own. On a trip to London with his mother, he visited the telescope firm of Broadhurst, Clarkson and Fuller, where they bought a brass tube 3-inch refractor for the princely sum of £7 10s, about £1,000 in today's money. In a paper about the observatory, Sir Patrick Moore described how Franks took him under his wing and taught him how to make astronomical observations. He was in his 80s, he wrote, and just about 5 feet tall. He had a long white beard and always wore a skull cap, so that he looked exactly like a gnome. He was a most delightful man, and it came as a very nasty shock when Franks died suddenly in 1935 following a road accident. A car knocked him off his bicycle that he rode every day between his home and the observatory. To Patrick's surprise, he was invited to take over and run the observatory. For a 14-year-old, this was a great opportunity, though his main duties were limited to showing astronomical objects to the Rockhurst house guests. Patrick Moore had full use of the telescope, and his first paper to the BAA was presented during this period. It dealt with features on the moon and was entitled Small Craters in the Mare Crisium, based on his own work. He sent it in and was notified by the Association's council that it had been accepted, but Patrick felt bound to explain he was not exactly elderly. The biggest telescope at the Brockhurst Observatory was designed and constructed by Nottingham astronomer Thomas William Bush, who was born in 1835. It was a 60 centimetre, that's a 24-inch reflector. When Bush died in April 1928, Settler Franks spent a long time trying to get it to work properly, but unfortunately the main mirror was ground incorrectly and the clock drive mechanism did not work well. The telescope had been dismantled and was in storage by the time Patrick Moore became a regular visitor to the observatory, so he never got to use it. The telescope was later transported to Nottingham University. The Second World War lasted between 1938 to 1945, and Patrick Moore joined the Royal Air Force as a navigator. As he moved around the country, he stayed at various air bases where he continued his hobby by observing variable stars and various other objects with binoculars, although his main interest was studying the moon. During the 1930s, when Patrick was a young BAA member, the driving force behind all of the BAA's lunar studies was Walter Goodacre, who had produced his own map in 1930 of the lunar surface, along with an accurate account of each of the major features. Goodacre directed the section for 42 years, between 1896 to 1938, but it all fell into something of a decline during the war years. After the war, in 1946, a much more vigorous director was appointed, Welshman Hugh Percy Wilkins, who was obsessed with drawing and mapping the moon. By 1924, he had published a lunar map 150 centimetres in diameter, and 8 years later he started an even larger map to a scale of 8.3 metres, that's 300 inches to the moon's diameter. This map, with Patrick Moore's help, was completed in 1951, with major revisions continuing until 1954. Percy Wilkins was a civil servant at the Ministry of Supply and had a crude observatory first at Eversley Avenue, Barnshurst, in Kent, housing his 12.5-inch reflector, and later, from the late 1940s, at Fairlawn Avenue, Bexleyheath, also in Kent. At this site, he installed a much larger reflecting telescope with its 45cm, that's 18-inch mirror. In 1946, upon Wilkins' appointment as the Lunar Section Director, he installed 23-year-old Patrick Moore as his main helper, a prestigious post for one so young. This was before Patrick had moved Wilkins' 12.5-inch reflector to East Grinstead, the same iconic telescope housed in Patrick's run-off shed and now in possession of the Science Museum. Of course, the BAA post was entirely voluntary, as the BAA was an organisation of advanced amateur astronomers and not professionals, but Patrick was delighted by the appointment. 2 years later, on the 19th of December 1948, Patrick was officially installed as the BAA's Lunar Section Secretary. Being based at Bexleyheath, Wilkins was only 25 miles to the north of Patrick's home at East Grinstead. Both men were within easy reach of BAA main meetings and council meetings. Despite not having a car at that time, Patrick had acquired his Vesuvius motorbike just after the war ended, so he was within easy travelling distance of Wilkins Observatory and often joined him in his lunar studies on clear nights. With the death of his mentor, William Sadler Franks, in 1935, Patrick Moore was again fortunate to meet Percy Wilkins, who tutored Patrick until Wilkins himself passed away in 1960. In 1953, Patrick Moore published his first astronomy book called Guide to the Moon, which was very successful, and together with Percy Wilkins, they jointly authored the book entitled The Moon, published in 1955. This included Wilkins' 300-inch map of the moon and all its detail. But there is no doubt that Patrick's book was the best of the 2 volumes. Patrick Moore's first television appearance was in a debate about the existence of flying saucers following a spate of reported sightings in the 1950s. Moore argued against Lord Dowding and other UFO enthusiasts. At the BBC, producer Paul Johnstone, after reading Patrick's first books, Guide to the Moon and Sun, Myths and Men, invited Patrick Moore to present a live monthly astronomy programme. The greatest difficulty was finding an appropriate theme tune. The opening of Jean Sibelius's Pelés at Masseron was chosen and used throughout the programme's existence. The programme was originally named Star Map before the Sky at Night was chosen in the Radio Times. On the 24th of April 1957 at 10:30 p.m, Patrick Moore presented the first episode about the comet Erin-Rowland. The programme was pitched to casual viewers up to professional astronomers in a format which remained consistent from its beginning. Since 1981, I personally met Patrick on several occasions. He was always polite, amusing and helpful. Sir Patrick Moore touched the lives of millions of people worldwide, and perhaps you too have memories of Patrick that you will always cherish. I would like to thank the BBC and Channel 4 for allowing me to include the following programme extracts, which you will find enjoyable to see again. As we now sit back and reminisce the life of Sir Patrick Moore.
Unlike the early astronauts, Sir Patrick Moore never left the Earth, but his lucid explanations of what went on in space made astronomy accessible and attractive to millions of television viewers. His death at the age of 89, after 55 years of his Sky at Night programmes, marks the end of a unique chapter in television history. Sir Patrick Moore inspired generations of viewers to gaze up into the sky at night.
There it is, the wing has appeared, the corona's vanished, and that is the end of this eclipse of the century. By Jove,
His eccentric style and unstoppable passion for astronomy created a television icon.
Good evening. Well, I'm afraid Burnham's comet turned out to be something of a disappointment.
Presenting his record-breaking programme for 55 years, only ever missing one show.
There must be generations of people, professional and amateur astronomers, who would say, Patrick Moore turned me on to astronomy. And I remember one time when we had to suddenly go to a broadcast, and at the time he was a pipe smoker, and he stuffed his pipe in his pocket and set fire to his suit. Everybody loved him for the sort of things that he did like that.
Without a formal education, he taught himself about the stars. As well as teaching himself to play the piano, he once performed with Albert Einstein, and of course the xylophone. His maps of the moon were used by NASA to choose Apollo landing sites, and he interviewed the first man to set foot there.
Do you think, from your knowledge of the moon, having been there, that it is going to be possible in the foreseeable future to set up scientific bases there on anything like a large scale?
Oh, I'm quite certain that we'll have such bases in our lifetime.
Moore's idiosyncratic style was irresistible to impersonators like John Culshaw.
The Russians sent their Lunik 3 probe here to take a look, finally putting paid to that story that the moon is made of green cheese.
And Moore happily played along when Culshaw called him up, pretending to be Doctor Who.
Hello?
Oh, hello, is that Patrick, Sir Patrick Moore?
Yes, who's there?
Oh, Sir Patrick, my dear fellow, I am the Doctor. I need to find a good place to land the TARDIS on Mars, and, Patrick, I wondered if you could think of anywhere suitable.
I would say probably somewhere in the Circus Major, I think.
Yeah.
From his antique manual typewriter, he produced over 70 books.
It's a lifelong hobby, isn't it?
Absolutely, a lifelong passion, which I think you're to blame.
Two of them co-authored with his friend Brian May, who has a PhD in astrophysics.
Patrick was unique, there's no doubt about it. He had an incredible will, he had great humour, great wit, and a kind of disregard for convention, which obviously made us love him even more. You know, he could get away with it because he was Patrick Moore.
This month's Sky at Night is about the distances of the stars. Hello to the first ever Sky at Night from Stonehenge. But at the present moment, unfortunately, we run into one of these banks of cloud. What we plan to do is to start off by showing you some stars, and then go on to the moon. I can't see a single star at the moment.
It's totally obscured. Just as I got it on the crosswires, it blacked right out.
How absolutely typical. There's nothing we can do about it. Major Yuri Gagarin just about to report mission accomplished to Mr. Khrushchev. You know, if I'd come on the air in 1957 and said that within 5 years I'd be showing you pictures of the first man to go round the Earth in orbit in a spaceship, well, I think you'd have regarded me as mad. Of course, rockets have now been there. 2 Russian ones, Venera 5 and 6, parachuted down through Venus's atmosphere and landed on the planet, sending back signals as they did so. This is Mars. Incredible pictures sent back from Viking, showing a red, rock-strewn landscape under a pink sky. And these pictures would have seemed science fiction not so very many years ago. Let's begin our tour between the planets.
Right, on this occasion then, I'll be Voyager 1. Now, I was launched from Earth in September 1977, and I was aimed at a point in the solar system where Jupiter will be in 1979. So in that intervening period, I've been moving off in this direction. I've been gradually feeling the immense gravitational attraction of Jupiter, and as I get closer and closer, I'm accelerated towards Jupiter, moving faster and faster.
What are you aiming to do, John?
Well, we're going to photograph the sky from...
For some celestial events, such as eclipses, the sky at night had no choice but to take to sea.
I gather you'll get a handhold.
Yes, I'm intending to do it that way because I believe you can hold it just as steadily that way on a heaving deck as you can on a tripod.
And there's the corona, and there's a brilliant prominence to the side of the sun.
And it's back to the high seas in 1998. Once again, weather conditions were perfect.
The diamond ring. And totality is upon us. Wow! One lovely red prominence, almost at the top of the sun, that's been here.
We were all looking forward to the eclipse in Cornwall.
The day before the eclipse was a most stunningly sunny day. And then on the day of the eclipse, it absolutely hammered down with rain most of the day. I think the camera got one slight shot of partiality. Most of the rest of the programme we sat under umbrellas muttering. At the moment of totality, about 3 million flashlights went off in Falmouth, which is probably brighter than the solar corona.
Well, I'm getting out of here because I do not wish to be associated with such a travesty of musical delight. Carry on!
so far, we've been talking about contact either by radio or direct physical contact by space probes. But there might be other means of doing it. It does, I know, sound very like science fiction to talk about teleportation or thought travel. But do you think this is entirely out of the question at the moment? And if so, should we be considering it seriously?
Well, there's very little in science which is absolutely out of the question. But I don't know of any evidence which suggests that we should invest a lot of time and money on those particular ventures, although I would not oppose anyone who thought that it was a useful investment of his time.
Then what should we be doing about this research?
I would say that there are several lines of approach, all of which look promising and should be pursued further. One is laboratory work on the question of the origin of life, making the molecules which here were able to reproduce themselves and led eventually to us. Secondly, a study of the organic chemistry in places like Jupiter, comets, and the interstellar medium. It's remarkable that the molecules of life are littering the cosmos. Thirdly, the space vehicle exploration of the neighboring planets, in particular for life or life-related compounds. If it turns out, for example, that Mars is lifeless, that is not a major disappointment, because then we have two planets near each other in space and time, life developed on one and not on the other. You have the classic case of an experiment and a control, and it'd be very important to investigate why life on the Earth and not on Mars. But even more exciting would be if Mars turns out to have life, for us to investigate what kind of life it is, how similar, how different from life on Earth. That will immensely broaden the science of biology. And then there is certainly the serious work, long-term, patient, cautious investigation of other stars for possible signals being sent our way.
Well, I'm afraid I haven't got any space rockets in my garden, but I have got a couple of big telescopes, and the largest of them is a 12.5-inch reflector in this runoff shed. Shed's very easy to operate. It has the great advantage you can get your telescope working quickly. This is what we call an alt-azimuth mounting, and you can see you can swing it round anywhere, and it is very convenient from that point of view. But it hasn't actually got the drive on it, and so most of my planetary observing is done with the other telescope, which has got the equatorial mount and is in a dome a few yards away. Well, this is a perfectly conventional telescope with an 8.5-inch mirror, and it's on a massive equatorial mount, as you can see, so it's very suitable indeed for observing the planets.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition. Welcome to this special edition of Stars at Night. I'm sorry to have to inflict myself on you like this, but Patrick couldn't be here tonight, so he asked me to step into his shoes. And why not? He's always wearing my suits. So here I am, and he asked me to apologise to you for not being here, but he had to go and show his telescope to the local townswomen's guild. If they like it, they're going to knit him a cover for it. Then tonight he's going to the Palladium for a night of 1,000 stars. Apparently they're one short. He's going to help them look for it. And what he'll do after that, well, we just don't know. Because of course, he never goes to bed at night. That's where his day's work starts. Only when dawn breaks does he put away his slide rule and relax. Of course, he likes a bit of fun afterwards, just like anyone else. Many's the time I've seen him put on his dinner jacket and go out and dance till lunchtime. This, of course, has its advantages. He never has trouble with last buses, and no one can accuse him of staggering home with a milkman, which is just as worse as a very gossipy neighbourhood. However, I digress, as my very good friend Frank Atfield would say. The reason Patrick asked me to come here tonight, apart from not wanting to lose a fee, was that tonight, and tonight only, whizzing across our sky, you will be able to see the celebrated Bailey's Comet. Now, this comet appears only once in every 200 years, so not many of us have actually seen it before. From all parts of Britain, it will be visible to the naked observer. So a trip to your back garden should be well worth it, if only to look over the fence at the woman next door. Now, this comet passes very, 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 very close to the moon. How close, we just don't know. but I would like, if I may, to show you a diagram of what is liable to happen. Oh, thank you, Sandra. Now, here you see we have the surface of the moon there, like that, and then, of course, we have the stratosphere here like this. Now, under here, you see there's a famous Sea of Tranquility here, and there's a mountain here known as the Height of Absurdity, and, of course, there are two craters here known as the Depths of Depravity. Now, now the last moonshot orbited here. There was an orbit just like that, but, of course, you see, Bailey's comet will pass even closer to the moon there and will be orbited there, you see, so it should be quite a splendid sight. Of course, that's sideways on. Would you put it up the right way, sir? What we'll see is more like that, you see. Truly a heavenly body not to be missed. Now, a word about next week. Off you go, Sandra, put some clothes on. That's the idea. Next week, Patrick himself hopes to be back with you when, owing to a great number of requests, he's going to devote the whole programme to asteroids and how to deal with them. Which should be a boon to all fellow sufferers. If you have any questions to ask Patrick, postcards only, please. And if you have any to ask Sandra, put them in a sealed envelope, as we have a filthy-minded postman. Good night.
Obviously, the geography of Mars isn't as familiar as that of the Earth, or the Moon for that matter. So I think the very first thing we ought to do is to find out exactly where we are. And these are some of the drawings that I made with that telescope you've just seen in September, before the dust cloud started, and when the dark markings were nicely on view. And that one is called the Syrtis Major. Anyone who's observed Mars knows that one. It's the most prominent of all the dark features, and you can't really mistake it under good conditions. And whether it's due to some kind of vegetation, or whether it's not, well, that's anybody's guess. Certainly we used to believe that it is, now we're not so sure. Well, in September, all was well. And then, in October, the dust storm started. And you can see that these drawings don't show very much. Well, that wasn't my fault, and it wasn't the fault of the telescope. It was the fault of Mars, because the atmosphere was so laden with dust that we simply couldn't see through it. It was the top of a kind of impenetrable bank of dust. And that lasted for some time. And then in December, we started to see the dark markings again, because the dust storm cleared away, as you can see here. But, of course, by that time, Mars had receded from the Earth, and the disk had become very small, so you couldn't see very much anyway. It was just awkward. Now, here, I've got a little globe of Mars. It was made in 1877 by a gentleman named Neaston, and he was a very famous Mars observer of his day. And he also showed the dark markings. There again is the Syrtis Major, which used to be called the Hourglass Sea, which is rather a nicer name, I think. And over here we have another one, just above the Martian equator, called the Mare Serenum. And I want to say more about that later on, because we now have got some fantastic close-range pictures of areas in the Mare Serenum. I say it just above the Martian equator, because on my drawings, and in this globe, we've got south at the top, because that's the way the observational astronomer, such as myself, actually sees them, because telescopes do turn things upside down. You see, a lunar crater is only really well seen when it's near what we call the terminator, or the boundary between the light and the dark sides of the moon. Let's have a look at one of the most famous craters on the lunar surface, Ptolemaeus. It's near the center of the moon's disk, and when it's near the shadow line, it's extremely conspicuous, because it has shadow inside it. But now let's look at Ptolemaeus near full moon, when the sun's high over it and there are no shadows. Even though the crater's 100 miles across, you simply can't see it. It's there. And even with a good telescope, and when you know exactly where it is, it's very hard to make out exactly the position of Ptolemaeus when there's no shadow inside it. Now this is important too, because it helps us to measure the depths of the lunar craters. A lot of people have asked me about that. And to try and explain how it's done, I've made a model of a typical lunar crater, and I'm going to show you the progress of sunrise over it. I'm going to illuminate it from the side by means of a lamp. And I think for this, we'd better have the studio lights out. Now, first of all, when the sun first appears over the crater, it illuminates only one wall. Then you can see the complete circle. And as the sun slowly rises, you get the central peak, the shadows inside draw back, until finally, when the sun is high over the crater, there's no shadow left inside it at all. Now, that process, as I did it then, takes only a few seconds. Of course, on the moon, really, it takes some time, because the moon spins very slowly. But I'm going to put the lamp back now to a mean position, so we get some shadow inside the crater.
Now, we can measure the length of that shadow, as seen from the Earth, obviously. We can also work out the height of the sun above the wall. And from that, we can get the height of the wall above the bottom of the crater. In other words, the depth.
Hello, welcome folks, my name's Brian May, and this is a first for me, because first of all I've never interviewed anyone in my life before, and Patrick Moore a few days ago interviewed me, so I'm delighted to be able to turn the tables on him and interview him today for you. Hello Patrick.
Great to see you, Brian.
Great to see you, sir. Can I ask you a question first of all?
Certainly.
Do you remember a moment in your life, because you're a musician and an astronomer?
A very amateur musician.
Well, do you remember a moment when you decided that astronomy had to be number one for you?
I do. I remember exactly. I was 6 years old. I was sitting in the armchair you sat in just now, in my old home in East Grinstead, and I picked up a small blue book belonging to my mother, which is over there, I have a second show it to, called The Story of the Solar System by G.F. Chambers. And I opened this book and thought, this is rather interesting, and I began reading it. Actually, it wasn't a boy's book. My reading was all right, and I read that book through and decided this was going to be pushed along, and it really went from there.
Amazing. Sky at Night has been going for 42 years, isn't that right?
Has indeed. We began in April 1957, because I had no idea then how long it would carry on, but we're still going, I'm glad to say, and we're going as long as I can.
And Patrick has written an amazing number of very learned books on many subjects, including the moon, on which he's a very well-known expert. I've only just about had time to have a look at this. I haven't had time to read it from cover to cover, but it's very comprehensive, isn't it? It's
well, Mars is a fascinating world, after, as you know, much less unlike the Earth than any other world. I remember, of course, you won't, I do, when the days when we thought there might be intelligent life there, low in the canals, and that went on right until I was fairly adult, I think. And even now, I think we'll agree, we're not sure there's no life there yet. I mean, there may be a certain amount of single-cell life there.
Yes, I noticed you say in the introduction that the things that you're able to write now are totally different from what you would have been able to write 30 years ago, and from what could be written in a few years' time.
Exactly, and we shall know more in a few months from now, I think, when we get to succeed in sending unmanned probes to Mars, getting the material, bringing it back, looking at it, and then I think we'll know. And I know what you think about this, Brian. Secretly, it's important to find out if there's any trace of life on Mars at all. That will show life will appear where it can, and must therefore be widespread.
Yes, very interesting, isn't it? Can I just throw a little surprise at you? Because talking about Mr. Moore's new book on Mars, I remembered that in 1956 I got this for a birthday present. I think I was about 10 years old, and it's a work of fiction.
I did a whole series of boys' novels at that stage.
Yes, and very good it is too, I must say. And do you still write fiction?
I haven't done any fiction for a long time. I really haven't had time to have a go, I'm afraid, but I think I might try some more one day. I've written boys' novels. I've never tried an adult novel. I did once write an adult novel, and I wrote it. I'm quite proud of it. I sat there and I read it through, and I held it out above the waste paper basket, and I released it.
Oh no!
It wasn't very good. I knew it wasn't.
Dear.
So no one has ever read it. You know, one of the great fascinations of astronomy is that one's always liable to find the unexpected, and that happened on February the 24th to Ian Chilton. At the Las Campanas Observatory, over in Chile in South America, he was taking a photograph of the Large Magellanic Cloud. And when he developed that photograph, he found something very strange indeed, a bright star where no star had been before. And he realized straight away it was something remarkable. He had in fact found a supernova. And not long afterwards, it was discovered independently in southern Africa by an amateur, Colin Henshaw. And he photographed it too. And there's a star field, and here is the supernova. And as you can see, it is really very bright indeed. That was in the Large Magellanic Cloud. But before we start talking about supernovae, what exactly are the Magellanic Clouds? Superficially, they look rather like broken off parts of the Milky Way. But I'm afraid you can't see them from here. They are too far south in the sky. Here's a picture of the Milky Way. You can see it there running across the center of the plate. And the Magellanic Clouds are to the south, down there below the main Milky Way itself. And they are, in fact, independent galaxies. And they are really spectacular. They're so bright that you can see them with the naked eye, and even strong moonlight won't drown the large cloud. And they contain objects of all kinds, stars of various kinds, and also nebulae. Look, for example, at the lovely Tarantula Nebula, which is a cloud of dust and gas, inside which we believe fresh stars are being created. Now, we get nebulae in our own galaxy. There's one, for example, in the Sword of Orion. But the Tarantula Nebula is very much larger and more brilliant than that. And if, in fact, it were as close as Orion's sword, it would cast shadows. But the Orion Nebula is in our own galaxy, and the Tarantula is in the Large Cloud of Magellan, which is an independent galaxy, a satellite of our own galaxy, and according to the Royal Greenwich Observatory estimate, the distance is about 155,000 light years.
Yes. We started off talking about music. Can I end up talking about music again? I have one of your CDs, which is called More Music, which I've really enjoyed. People have no idea on the whole how much Patrick Moore gets through in terms of output. It's astounding. I mean, Patrick does fiction, as we've seen. He does a number of technical books on astronomy and popular books on astronomy. He also writes a lot of music. He also plays music. And there's a CD just recently out which is called More Music, and it has a really very touching nocturne on it.
Yes, of course, I'm not in the musical world as much as you are. And of course, you know, what people tend to forget is that you are known throughout the world as a musician. People forget you're an astronomer. Actually, as an astronomer, you are much more qualified than I am.
I don't think so. It's very kind of you to say so, but
you are much more highly qualified than I am.
I was nearly qualified.
More so than I am.
Oh, well. Thank you so much, Patrick.
The transit is about to start.
It's right on the very limb. I can see it just cutting through the top of the photosphere.
What's the computer showing you?
It's showing Venus about halfway onto the solar disk now. About 4 or 5 minutes' time, we should see the black drop.
I can see it quite clearly, and there's no mistaking it now. Well, that was absolutely great. One of the most exciting things I've ever seen. And remember that beneath those deceptively cool-looking clouds, there are scorching hot craters. And I'll look forward again to seeing you next month. And thank you for watching us.
The sky is now completely overcast. Good night.
Good night.
Sir Patrick Moore, who is remembered today on the 2nd anniversary of his last TV appearance. CDs of Sir Patrick Moore's music are still available from Amazon, priced around €6. The audio CD contains several tracks which were recorded in 2001 by the Royal National Scottish Orchestra, conducted by Robert Valier. That is all we have time for this month. Please visit our website, Vimeo, where you can watch all of the past shows of Astronomy in Space. And if you like this program, please share it with your friends and members of your local astronomical society. Until we come back next month, good evening.